It's strange how life can change in the blink of an eye. One moment, you're just another college sophomore trying to survive midterms and Netflix binges, and the next, your entire world crumbles around you. That's exactly what happened to me, Maya. I was in my second year at a state university, not some prestigious Ivy League school like my brother Liam, but it was good enough for me. I had worked tirelessly to get there, balancing part-time jobs, scholarships, and late-night study sessions. For once, I felt like I was on the right path, even if it wasn't perfect. But all that changed one fateful Saturday morning. I remember it vividly. The day started innocently enough. I was holed up in my room, catching up on assignments and zoning out with some mindless TV shows. My parents hadn't bothered checking in on me for weeks, which wasn't unusual. They rarely cared about what I did unless it involved sacrificing something for Liam or Sarah. So when they called me downstairs for an emergency family meeting, my stomach dropped. Something about their tone sent chills down my spine. As I walked into the living room, I could already feel the tension thick in the air. My dad sat there with his arms crossed, wearing that cold, calculating expression he always used during arguments. His voice was calm but laced with venom as he began speaking. "Maya, we need to talk about your future," he said, each word slicing through me like a knife. He didn't sound concerned, he sounded like a prosecutor delivering a verdict. Before I could even process what was happening, he dropped the bombshell: "We've decided it would be best for you to take a break from college." At first, I thought I misheard him. A break? What did that even mean? But then my mom chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Honey, you've been doing okay, but we think it's time you start contributing more to the family. Liam is starting law school soon, and we need to make sure Sarah's future is secure too." It hit me like a freight train. They wanted me to drop out of college, abandon everything I'd worked so hard for, just so I could work full-time and fund Liam's education and Sarah's college fund. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own parents were asking me to give up my dreams, my future, for someone else's success. I tried to argue, explaining that I was passing my classes, that I had plans, that this was my life too. But they weren't listening. My mom turned on me, her voice sharp and cutting. "Not everyone is cut out for higher education, Maya. There's no shame in honest work." Honest work? Was she serious? And then came the dagger. "If you refuse, don't expect us to support you anymore. If you walk away now, consider yourself disowned. We won't mention your name again." The room spun, disowned, over college. My dad leaned back, his face unreadable, while my mom erupted into hysterics. She screamed at me, calling me ungrateful, throwing accusations like daggers. In her rage, she grabbed a glass from the table and hurled it against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, mirroring the way my heart felt in that moment. They weren't just threatening me, they were erasing me, as if I were nothing more than a burden they no longer wanted to carry. I stood there, frozen, unable to comprehend how things had escalated so quickly. All I could think was, how could they do this? How could they treat me like I don't matter? But deep down, I realized this wasn't entirely unexpected. I'd always been the afterthought, the backup plan, the one who existed only to prop up Liam and Sarah. Still, hearing them say those words aloud was like being punched in the gut. I didn't cry, though. Instead, I found a strength I didn't know I had. Looking them straight in the eyes, I said, "Fine. If that's how you feel, I'll figure it out on my own." The silence that followed was deafening. My mom stared at me, tears streaming down her face, while my dad muttered under his breath, "You'll regret this decision." But they didn't stop me. They didn't even try. It was as if they'd already written me off, erased me from their lives before I'd even left the house. And maybe that hurt the most, not the yelling, not the threats, but the realization that they truly didn't care. The moment I stepped out of that house, the weight of everything hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just the suitcase in my hand or the rain pouring down in sheets, it was the realization that I was truly on my own now. My parents had made their stance crystal clear: either I bowed to their demands and abandoned my dreams, or I left and faced whatever came next without them. I chose the latter, but the cost of that choice became painfully apparent almost immediately. As soon as I got into the Uber Sarah had called for me, I tried to check my bank account to see how much money I had left. But when I opened the app, my heart sank. The screen flashed an error message, account locked. They'd done it. My parents had frozen my account, the one they'd helped set up years ago, the one where every penny I earned from part-time jobs went. No warning, no explanation. Just cold, calculated control. Panic bubbled inside me. How was I supposed to survive? Rent, food, transportation, all of it required money, and suddenly, I had none. I sat there in the back seat of the car, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, probably noticing the tears streaming down my face mixing with the rainwater dripping from my hair. "You okay, miss?" he asked hesitantly. I nodded quickly, not trusting myself to speak. What could I say? That my own parents had cut me off financially because I refused to give up my education. That I was sitting here with nothing but a suitcase full of clothes and a broken heart. Desperation clawed at me as we drove towards Sarah's apartment. I scrolled through my contacts, trying to figure out who might be able to help. Most of my friends were students like me, barely scraping by themselves. Then I remembered Jake, a guy from my art class who always seemed to have a side hustle going on. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy from sleep. "Jake," I blurted out before he could ask why I was calling. "I need your help. Can you lend me some cash? Just until I get back on my feet." There was a pause, and for a second, I thought he'd hang up. But then he sighed. "Yeah, sure. How much do you need?" Relief washed over me, but it was fleeting. This wasn't supposed to happen. I shouldn't have needed to beg for money just to survive. While Jake transferred the funds, my phone buzzed again. A text from my dad. Of course. I stared at the words, each one feeling like another blow to my already battered soul. "You'll regret this decision for the rest of your life. No one will help you except us." The audacity of it made me want to scream. Help me. They were the ones who pushed me out the door. Yet here they were, twisting the knife further, pretending they cared while simultaneously cutting off every lifeline I had. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to respond, to tell them exactly what I thought of their manipulative games, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed to focus on surviving first. By the time the Uber pulled up to Sarah's building, the rain had soaked through my hoodie and jeans, leaving me shivering uncontrollably. The suitcase felt impossibly heavy as I dragged it out of the trunk, its wheels catching on the uneven pavement. Every step felt like a battle against gravity itself. The streets were eerily quiet, save for the sound of rain pelting the ground and the occasional rumble of thunder overhead. For a brief moment, I wondered if anyone walking by would stop to ask if I was okay. But no one did. Maybe they assumed I deserved this somehow. Or maybe they simply didn't care. When I finally reached Sarah's door, she opened it before I even had a chance to knock. Her eyes widened at the sight of me drenched, trembling, and clutching my suitcase like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Without a word, she pulled me inside and wrapped me in a towel. "What happened?" she asked softly, her voice laced with concern. I wanted to explain, to tell her everything, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I collapsed onto her couch, letting the exhaustion and despair wash over me. Sarah didn't press for details right away. She handed me a blanket, ordered pizza, and put on some mindless TV show to fill the silence. For the first time in hours, I felt safe. But even as I sat there, wrapped in warmth and surrounded by kindness, I couldn't shake the image of myself standing outside in the rain, utterly alone. It haunted me not because of the physical discomfort, but because of what it represented. I had spent my entire life seeking approval, validation, love from people who never truly saw me. And now, for the first time, I was free. Free to fail, free to succeed, free to figure things out on my own terms. But freedom came at a price, and tonight, that price felt unbearably high. The days following my departure from home felt like a blur of exhaustion, fear, and determination. I had escaped the suffocating grip of my parents, but freedom came with its own set of challenges, ones that hit me harder than I ever imagined. Sarah's apartment was tiny, barely enough space for her to live comfortably on her own, let alone share with someone else. The first few nights, I slept on her couch, a lumpy, threadbare thing that smelled faintly of old coffee and desperation. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was humiliating. Here I was, a college student who had worked so hard to get where I was, now reduced to sleeping on a stranger's sofa because I didn't have anywhere else to go. But as bad as the couch was, hunger was worse. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it meant to truly be broke. My parents had frozen my bank account, leaving me with nothing but the cash Jake had lent me, and even that was running dangerously low. I rationed what little food Sarah had in her pantry, trying not to overstay my welcome or burden her too much. Some nights, I went to bed with an empty stomach, telling myself it was temporary, that things would get better soon. But soon felt like an eternity when you were staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of your own heartbeat echoing in the dark. Things reached a breaking point one afternoon at work. I had managed to land a part-time job at the university library, shelving books and helping students find resources. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid just enough to keep me afloat, or so I thought. That day, I was halfway through my shift when dizziness washed over me like a tidal wave. My vision blurred, and the next thing I knew, I was lying on the cold tile floor, staring up at the fluorescent lights while voices buzzed around me like distant bees. Someone must have called an ambulance, because the next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed, tubes attached to my arm and a nurse hovering over me. "You passed out from exhaustion and malnutrition," she said gently, her voice tinged with concern. "When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" I couldn't answer. How could I admit that I hadn't eaten anything substantial in days? That I'd been surviving on scraps and cheap instant noodles because I couldn't afford anything else? The shame burned hotter than any fever. As the nurse handed me a protein shake and instructed me to drink slowly, I realized how close I had come to completely breaking down. This wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about self-preservation. The hospital visit only added to my mounting problems. Not only did I miss several shifts at the library, but I also fell behind on paying my dorm fees. By the time I returned to campus, I found an eviction notice taped to my door. Failure to pay outstanding balance within 72 hours will result in removal from housing. Panic clawed at my chest. Where was I supposed to go? I couldn't impose on Sarah any longer, not after everything she'd already done for me. Desperation drove me to call Aunt Sarah, the one person who had always understood me better than anyone else. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and no nonsense. "Maya, what's wrong?" I hesitated, choking back tears before finally spilling everything: the eviction notice, the hospital visit, the constant struggle to make ends meet. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I feared she might judge me, tell me I should have stayed with my parents. Instead, she sighed deeply and said, "Listen to me, sweetheart. You're stronger than this. Come stay with me until you get back on your feet. We'll figure it out together." Relief flooded through me, but it was short-lived. Moving in with Aunt Sarah meant admitting defeat, at least. That's how it felt. She lived 2 hours away from campus, which made commuting nearly impossible. Dropping out seemed like the only logical solution, but the thought of giving up terrified me. Hadn't I fought too hard to get here? To let all of that slip away now would mean surrendering to everything my parents wanted to prove them right. No, I couldn't do that. I wouldn't. Aunt Sarah arrived the next morning, her car packed with groceries and blankets. She took one look at me, pale, exhausted, and visibly thinner, and pulled me into a tight hug. "You're going to be okay," she whispered fiercely, as if willing it to be true. Over the next few days, she helped me sort through my finances, applying for emergency aid and setting up a payment plan with the university. Slowly, piece by piece, we began rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when I wanted to give up entirely, but Aunt Sarah refused to let me fall apart. One evening, as we sat on her porch watching the sunset, she turned to me and said, "Maya, sometimes being strong doesn't mean never falling. It means getting back up every time you do. Her words stuck with me, echoing in my mind long after the sun had disappeared below the horizon. For the first time since leaving home, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. Not just survive, but thrive, because despite everything, I still had one thing my parents could never take away from me: my resilience. The text message from Liam came out of nowhere. After months of silence, his name flashing on my phone felt like a ghost from the past, something I wasn't ready to confront. My thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating. What could he possibly want now? Was this another guilt trip orchestrated by our parents? Or worse, had they sent him as their messenger to try and reel me back into their toxic orbit? But curiosity got the better of me. His message was short and cryptic. Can we meet up? I need to talk. No explanation, no apology, just those words hanging there, heavy with unspoken meaning. I debated ignoring it. After everything that had happened, the betrayal, the disownment, the cold indifference, I didn't owe him anything. But something about the tone of his message gnawed at me. It wasn't demanding or manipulative like our parents' texts. It sounded vulnerable. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him halfway at a small coffee shop nestled between my campus and his law school. If things went south, I could always leave. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the polished, confident Liam I'd grown up with, the one who always seemed untouchable. Instead, he looked broken. His hair was messy, his tie loose around his neck, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. For a moment, I wondered if I'd stepped into an alternate reality where roles were reversed. This wasn't the golden boy everyone idolized, it was someone else entirely. We ordered coffees, but neither of us touched them right away. The silence stretched thin, awkward, and suffocating. Finally, Liam broke it. "I'm sorry," he blurted out, his voice cracking under the weight of emotion. Just like that, no build-up, no excuses, just an apology. For what exactly? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. "For everything," he said, staring down at his untouched coffee. "For not saying anything when you left. For not sticking up for you all these years. I've always known how messed up it was the way they treated you, but it was easier to just go along with it." His admission hit me harder than I expected. All this time, I'd assumed Liam was clueless, that he genuinely believed our parents' warped version of fairness. But hearing him admit that he knew, that he chose to stay silent, felt like another betrayal. "So what changed?" I demanded, my voice sharp. "Why are you telling me this now?" He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "When you stood up to them, it made me realize how messed up things really are. I always knew, but I didn't want to admit it. I was comfortable being the favorite. Why would I rock the boat?" His words stung, but they also forced me to see him differently, not as the perfect son our parents had groomed him to be, but as someone who was just as trapped as I was. "And now," I pressed, "I'm quitting law school," he confessed, his voice trembling. "It's what Mom and Dad wanted, not me. I've been miserable for months, pretending to be something I'm not. Seeing you leave and actually do something for yourself, it woke me up. I can't keep living like this." The revelation left me speechless. Liam, the future lawyer, the golden child, was walking away from everything our parents had planned for him. He told me he was applying to an education program instead, pursuing his dream of becoming a teacher. Part of me wanted to scream at him for staying silent for so long, for never once standing up for me. But another part of me couldn't help but feel proud of him for finally breaking free. As we talked, Liam revealed more about his own struggles, the relentless pressure from our parents, the constant need to be perfect. And then, in a moment I'll never forget, he broke down completely. Tears streamed down his face as he admitted, "I thought about ending it, Maya. About giving up, because I couldn't handle the pressure anymore." My heart shattered. This was Liam, the person I'd envied my entire life, the one who seemed to have it all together. Yet here he was, confessing that he'd been drowning too. Before I could process it all, he dropped another bombshell. "I knew about the house," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. They told me weeks ago. I should have said something, but I didn't. The betrayal cut deeper than ever. Not only had our parents sold the family home without consulting me, but Liam had kept it from me too. They weren't just cutting ties, they were erasing me entirely. By the end of the conversation, I felt raw, exposed. We weren't okay yet, not fully, but for the first time, I saw Liam as more than just the favored son. He was someone who had suffered in his own way, someone trying to rebuild himself. As I walked back to my dorm that night, I realized something important. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. The silence after blocking my parents' numbers was supposed to be liberating. For the first time in months, I wasn't waking up to guilt-laden texts or passive-aggressive voicemails from relatives acting as messengers for my parents' wrath. But peace, it seemed, was never meant to last, not when you're dealing with people who see manipulation as an art form. It started subtly enough. A week after severing contact, an envelope arrived in the mail. At first glance, it looked innocuous, a plain white envelope with no return address. My stomach churned as I opened it, half expecting another guilt trip disguised as concern. Instead, what fell out was a legal document so cold and calculated that it felt like being punched in the gut. It was a letter from a lawyer, my parents' lawyer, demanding repayment of every penny they'd ever spent on me. Tuition fees, school supplies, even birthday gifts. They itemized everything down to the last cent. The total? Over $50,000. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling. How could they do this? After everything, the emotional abuse, the betrayal, the disownment, they were now trying to financially ruin me. Each line item read like a personal attack, a reminder of how they viewed me, not as their daughter but as an investment gone wrong. Tuition for sophomore year, $8,200. Private tutoring sessions, grades 9 to 12, $4,500. Even the prom dress I'd begged them for was listed. Formal attire, $350. They weren't just asking for money. They were cataloging my existence, reducing my life to transactions. Panic set in almost immediately. I didn't have anywhere near that amount of money. Between juggling rent, tuition, and basic living expenses, I was barely scraping by. This demand wasn't about recouping costs, it was punishment, pure and simple. A way to make me regret standing up to them, to force me back into their toxic orbit. I crumpled the letter in my fist, hair streaming down my face. Was there no limit to how far they'd go to control me? And then came the calls, not from my parents directly, they knew better than to try again, but from everyone else in the family. Aunt Margaret, Grandma Ruth, even Uncle Joe, whom I hadn't spoken to in years. Their messages flooded my phone, each one more accusatory than the last. How could you treat your parents like this? You're tearing the family apart. Do you have any idea how much pain you've caused? Every text, every voicemail, felt like a dagger twisting deeper into my already battered soul. Uncle Joe's call was particularly brutal. He showed up unannounced at my dorm one evening, his face red with anger. "What's wrong with you, Maya?" he barked before I'd even closed the door behind him. "Your mom is devastated. She can't sleep, can't eat, all because of you." His words hit like a sledgehammer. Guilt clawed at me, threatening to undo all the progress I'd made in reclaiming my independence. But beneath the guilt was something stronger, rage, pure, and filtered rage. "You think I don't know what they're doing?" I shot back, my voice shaking but firm. "They're using you to get to me. To guilt me into coming back. Well, it won't work." Uncle Joe scoffed, pacing the tiny room like a caged animal. "Don't flatter yourself, kid. This isn't about them controlling you. This is about you throwing away everything they've done for you. You're selfish, Maya. Selfish and ungrateful." His words stung, but they also fueled my resolve. If anything, his tirade confirmed what I already knew. None of this was about gratitude or fairness. It was about power. My parents, and by extension, the rest of the family, couldn't stand the fact that I had stepped outside their carefully constructed narrative. That I had dared to exist beyond their expectations. Things escalated quickly after that. Grandma Ruth called next, her voice trembling with emotion. "Maya, sweetheart," she began, her tone saccharine yet laced with judgment. Is this really how you want to be remembered, as the girl who broke her family? Her question haunted me. Was this how they saw me now? Not as someone fighting for her own future, but as a villain, a destroyer of worlds. The weight of their collective disappointment pressed down on me, suffocating and relentless. Yet amidst the chaos, a small part of me refused to yield. I thought about Liam, about Sarah, about the countless times I'd swallowed my pride to keep the peace. No more. I wouldn't let them define me anymore. By the end of the week, I'd stopped answering calls altogether. Let them rant, let them accuse I wasn't playing their game. Blocking their numbers felt like cutting off a lifeline, but it was necessary. Survival demanded distance. And though the financial burden loomed large, I clung to the belief that I could rebuild, one step at a time. The call came late at night, shattering the fragile peace I'd worked so hard to build for myself. My phone buzzed on the bedside table, its screen lighting up the dark room like a flare in the wilderness. When I saw Sarah's name flashing across it, my stomach tightened. We hadn't spoken much since I left home, just occasional texts that felt more obligatory than heartfelt. But this wasn't a casual check-in. Something was wrong. Maya, her voice trembled as soon as I answered, raw with panic and desperation. They know. Mom and Dad, they found out I've been talking to you. My heart sank. Of course they did. They always had eyes everywhere, didn't they? What happened? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the dread pulling in my chest. They're mad, she choked out, her words tumbling over each other like stones down a cliff. They said if I keep talking to you, they'll cut me off. No college fund, no financial support, nothing. They told me to choose, Maya, choose between them and you. Her voice cracked on the last word, and I could hear the tears spilling over before she even tried to hold them back. The weight of her confession crushed me. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about dragging Sarah into the mess our parents had created. She was only 16, still caught in their web of expectations and control. And now, because of me, she was being forced to pick sides. I'm sorry, I whispered, though the words felt hollow. What good was an apology when the damage had already been done? You don't have to talk to me if it's going to hurt you, Sarah. I don't want that. No, she shouted, her voice breaking under the strain. I don't want to lose you too, but I can't fight them, Maya. I can't. They'll ruin everything. Her sobs echoed through the line, sharp and jagged, cutting deeper than any accusation ever could. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, feeling utterly powerless. How could I tell her to stand up to them when doing so meant risking her entire future? How could I ask her to sacrifice everything she'd worked for just to stay connected to me? Sarah, I said softly, forcing myself to sound calm even though my insides were churning. Listen to me. You have to do what's best for you. If staying quiet keeps you safe, then that's what you need to do. I'll understand, but I don't want to lose you. She cried, her voice rising to a near scream. Why does it have to be like this? Why do they make everything so hard? Her question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Why did they do this? Why did they turn every relationship into a battleground, every decision into a test of loyalty? I wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and focused on Sarah. I know it's not fair, I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to steady it. And I hate that they're putting you in this position. But you can't let them destroy you, okay? Promise me that. There was a long pause, broken only by the sound of her ragged breathing. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do, Maya. I feel like no matter what I choose, someone gets hurt. Her honesty broke something inside me. Here was my little sister, the golden child who had always seemed untouchable, crumbling under the same pressure that had nearly destroyed me. For years, I'd resented her for being the favorite, for getting everything I never did. But in that moment, all I felt was grief for her, for me, for the family we could have had but never would. I wish I could fix this for you, I admitted, tears streaming down my face. But I can't. All I can do is promise that I'll always be here, even if we can't talk, even if they try to erase me completely. She didn't respond right away, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. Then, quietly, she said, "I don't want to lose you, Maya. Please don't give up on me." Her plea hit me like a freight train, leaving me breathless and aching. "I won't," I promised, my voice cracking. "No matter what happens, I won't." When we finally hung up, I collapsed onto my bed, the weight of the conversation pressing down on me like a lead blanket. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Leaving was supposed to free both of us, not drag her further into the chaos. But as much as it pained me to admit it, Sarah wasn't ready to break free. Not yet. Maybe someday she would find the strength to stand up to them, just like Liam had. Until then, all I could do was wait and hope that she wouldn't lose herself in the process. Joining the student support group for people with toxic family backgrounds was supposed to be a way for me to process my own pain. I never imagined it would become a lifeline not just for me, but for someone else too. It started one rainy Tuesday evening during one of our weekly meetings. The room was dimly lit, the air heavy with unspoken struggles. We sat in a circle, sharing stories that most people would shy away from hearing. That night, a girl named Emily broke down in tears midway through her story. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered, her voice trembling so hard it barely carried across the room. "I've tried everything: therapy, meds, journaling, but nothing helps. Every day feels like drowning, and no one even notices." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I recognized that feeling, the suffocating weight of loneliness, the sense that no one truly sees you. After the meeting ended, I found myself lingering behind while others filed out. Emily stayed seated on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest, staring blankly at the wall. Something inside me wouldn't let me leave her there. "Hey," I said softly, crouching beside her, "do you want to talk more? Or, I don't know, maybe grab some coffee or something?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It's not going to help. Nothing does." But I didn't give up. Over the next few hours, we really talked. She confessed that she'd been planning to end her life, detailing how she'd written goodbye letters and hidden pills in her bag. My heart raced as I listened, torn between panic and determination. I couldn't lose her, not tonight. So I stayed by her side, keeping her talking until dawn broke through the windows. By then, exhaustion had set in, but Emily finally agreed to call a crisis hotline and reach out to her therapist. That night changed something in me. Helping Emily made me realize how much I needed connection, not just for myself, but to remind others they weren't alone. For the first time, I understood that my pain wasn't just mine to carry. It could also fuel purpose. But just as I began embracing this newfound role, another incident reminded me how fragile safety could be. It happened late one Friday night after a long shift at the library. I was walking home alone, headphones in, lost in thought about the peer support program I'd been developing. The streets were eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes your footsteps echo unnaturally loud. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man, his face obscured by a hoodie, moving closer faster than I expected. Before I could react, he grabbed my arm, yanking me into an alley. Fear surged through me, primal and overwhelming. I screamed, thrashing against his grip, but he was stronger. His other hand clamped over my mouth, muffling my cries. My mind raced, searching for a way out. Just as despair began to creep in, a voice cut through the darkness. "Let her go." It was Jake, one of the guys from the support group. He must have noticed I hadn't shown up at our usual post-shift hangout spot and came looking for me. Without hesitation, he lunged at the attacker, tackling him to the ground. The man cursed, scrambling to his feet before disappearing into the night. Jake turned to me, his face pale but determined. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" I nodded numbly, still shaking from adrenaline. "I think so, thank you. If you hadn't come." He pulled me into a tight hug, letting me cry into his shoulder. "You're safe now. Let's get you home." The rest of the walk passed in a blur. When we finally reached my dorm, Jake insisted on staying until I calmed down enough to sleep. As I lay in bed that night, Replaying the attack in my mind, I realized how close I'd come to disaster. The world outside wasn't the safe haven I'd hoped for. It was unpredictable, dangerous, and often cruel. Yet, amidst the chaos, there were people like Jake who stepped in when it mattered most. In the days that followed, I threw myself into the peer support program with renewed urgency. Each session became a reminder of why this work mattered, not just for others, but for me too. Through helping others navigate their pain, I was learning to heal my own. And though scars from both my past and recent trauma lingered, I knew I wasn't alone. Together, we were building a community where vulnerability wasn't weakness, it was strength. The day I received the official offer for my university job was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my life. After months of relentless effort juggling classes, working part-time at the library, and building a peer support program, I had finally achieved something monumental. Something that proved to the world, and more importantly, to myself, that I could thrive on my own terms. But as fate would have it, happiness in my family always came with strings attached. I was sitting in my new office, still pinching myself over the email confirmation from HR, when the door swung open without warning. My heart sank as I looked up to see them standing there, my parents. Their faces were unreadable masks of cold indifference, their postures rigid like statues carved out of stone. For a moment, I thought I might be hallucinating. How did they even know where I worked? Then reality hit me like a freight train. Of course they knew. They always found ways to insert themselves into my life when it suited them. "Maya," my father began, his voice clipped and authoritative, "we need to talk." My stomach churned as I gestured for them to sit, though they remained standing. This wasn't a casual visit. This was an ambush. My mother's eyes scanned the room disapprovingly, lingering on the framed diploma hanging on the wall before she turned her gaze back to me. "You've made quite a spectacle of yourself," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "But now it's time to come home." "Come home," I repeated, incredulous. "Why?" "So you can tell me again how useless I am, how I'll never measure up to Liam or Sarah." "This isn't about comparisons," my father interjected sharply. "It's about your duty to this family. You've embarrassed us enough by running away and cutting ties. If you don't return now, we will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of daughter you are, the selfish and grateful kind." His words felt like daggers piercing through me, but beneath the sting was a simmering rage. Was this really who they were? People so consumed by appearances that they'd resort to threats just to drag me back into their toxic orbit. I clenched my fists under the desk, forcing myself to stay composed. This was at the moment I'd feared and anticipated since leaving home, the final showdown. "You think exposing me will hurt me?" I shot back, my voice trembling but firm. "Go ahead. Tell the world how I refused to give up my education for Liam and Sarah. Tell them how you disowned me because I dared to stand up for myself. See if anyone sides with you after that." For the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in their eyes. They weren't used to defiance, not from me, anyway. My mother stepped forward, her expression softening slightly, though her words remained sharp. "Maya, please, don't make this harder than it has to be. We're trying to protect the family name. Can't you understand that?" "No," I replied, my voice steady now, each word landing like a hammer blow. "What I understand is that you've spent my entire life controlling me, manipulating me, and making me feel like I wasn't good enough unless I fit into your perfect little mold. Well, guess what? I don't need your approval anymore. I've built a life for myself, a real one, not the fake version you tried to force on me." Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. My father's jaw tightened, and my mother's hands trembled as she clutched her purse. For once, they had nothing to say. No clever lawyer tactics, no guilt trips, no veiled insults, just silence. "I'm not coming back," I continued, rising from my chair to meet their gaze head-on. "Not now, not ever. You made your choice when you cut me off, and I've made mine. I'm done letting you dictate my worth. I'm done living for anyone but myself." As they turned to leave, defeated and speechless, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, triumph, sadness, and even a twinge of regret. But above all, I felt free, free from their expectations, their judgment, their control. It wasn't easy, and it probably never would be. But for the first time in my life, I truly belonged to myself. My journey has taught me so much about self-worth and resilience. Life throws challenges at you, especially when you're dealing with difficult relationships or manipulative environments. I've learned that true strength isn't about never struggling, it's about recognizing your value and refusing to let others define who you are. Whether it's familial pressures or societal expectations, I now know that my identity is mine alone to shape. No one else gets to decide what my future looks like. Through everything being disowned by my parents, standing up for myself, and building a life on my own, I realized how important it is to stay firm in your convictions. There were moments when I felt lost, scared, and unsure if I was doing the right thing. But leaning on people who genuinely cared about me made all the difference. And Sarah, Liam, after he changed, even Sarah herself, they reminded me that I wasn't alone, even when it felt like the whole world was against me. I also learned that compromising your dreams for someone else's vision of success only leads to regret. My parents wanted me to give up school for Liam and Sarah, but I knew deep down that wasn't what I wanted. Walking away from their control was terrifying, but it was also freeing. For the first time, I could breathe without feeling like I had to live up to impossible standards. Now, as I sit here reflecting on everything, I know this freedom doesn't come easy. It takes courage, determination, and sometimes making choices that feel unbearable in the moment. But trust me, it's worth fighting for. You deserve a life where you can be yourself, unapologetically and authentically. And no matter how hard things get, don't ever lose sight of that truth. Your freedom, your happiness, your dreams, they're all worth it.